some social phenomenon about humans and society to the characteristics of the environments in which they are found, right? And really gross, simple examples of this would have it be the case that somehow the climate where you live affects your temperament, right? The idea that in tropical climates, everyone is kind of laid back because it's just so hot. I mean, all I really want to do is sit on the beach, right? The idea that that people there are like that because the temperature is like that is an environmental determinist argument. Now, the reason these matter is that environmental determinism is like 3,500 years old in the Western tradition. It's been going on for a long time, and it sort of never goes away, and it fairly routinely produces some really retrograde ideas about the differences among peoples, for example. Basically, the idea that you'll never get those people on those beaches to work hard enough because it's just who they are. They are just lazy. It's kind of the Europeans said about people in most of the tropical world for hundreds of years. At a global scale, perhaps this is an environmentally determinist argument, right? Insofar as he's saying this package of plants and animals and humans and organisms and diseases and so forth works in certain climates, and so it went certain places and succeeded there because of the climates there, and it failed in other places because of the climates at those places, right? But it gets a lot more complicated when you start zooming in, scaling down, and looking at this at smaller scales and trying to make it work on the ground, so to speak, right? And I'll get into some of those problems here. So, for example, corn and potatoes, they went the other way. They didn't actually evolve in the Old World as part of the Old World Neolithic Revolution. They actually evolved in the Americas. They were domesticated by Native Americans. They were here, they were found by Europeans, so to speak, when the Europeans got here, and they were such magnificent food sources that they were taken back to Europe, and they became extremely important sources of food in Europe for Europeans. So wheat, which went from Europe to the New World, is not the whole story here. There's also questions about how do we explain places where Europeans did have the climate, but didn't succeed in dominating, in displacing the native populations. Northern Mexico is a nice example. The Spanish threw all kinds of money and people and guns, armies, missionaries, the whole 9 yards, at the native peoples of what we now think of as northern Mexico or the southwestern United States, and never succeeded. The Apaches and others, the Seris, fought them back and prevailed over and over and over and over and over again for hundreds of years. And in some cases, they actually took those animals, for example, horses, cows, and they took some of those plants, and they said, thanks very much, these are nice, we like these, we can really work with these. And they did this sort of reverse game on the Europeans. The Great Plains is another nice example, right? The horse shows up courtesy of the Spaniards, and the Native Americans quickly learn how to tame, break, ride, utilize horses, and turn around and use them not only to fight the Spanish, and then subsequently to fight the Americans, rather the U.S., but also to develop new ways of making livelihoods for themselves, right? It changed their ability to hunt bison, for example, made possible vast increases in the number of bison they could kill. So it's a little harder to make this work when you start looking at specific examples of plants, animals, humans interacting, Old World, New World peoples interacting at tighter geographical and temporal scales. Here's a depiction of this, sort of looking at it from the perspective of all of the domesticated plants and where they came from. So we'll look at the table in the lower right in a moment. For now, focus on this map. This is the world divided up into regions according to plant genetic diversity. And this is a way of classifying the plants of the world regionally based on patterns. These are areas where you can sort of say, okay, certain collections of plants evolved in roughly this place. And look at where you break that out. These are the crops. These are the industrial crops. Well, and actually the starred ones are industrial. This is the range of plant diversity. These are the plants that have been domesticated and become important agricultural crops. And you can see that they came from all over the world, but they didn't predominantly come from the Old World, or from what we think of as the Old World of the Neolithic Revolution that Crosby's considering, right? So the longest lists, first, is Latin America, in terms of the diversity of plants that have turned out to be useful, suitable for domestic agricultural production, including corn and potatoes, which are, of course, hugely important in world agricultural production today. Rice, which is equally important, is the other big one, and it doesn't come from Southwest Asia, it comes from East Asia, right? You look at Australia, there's nothing there, which would fit the Crosby argument. North America, there's just one, but it's not fair to say, in gross, that somehow the Old World is where all the good agricultural crops, plants, evolved. It's simply not true. The New World was also extremely important, and other parts of Asia were extremely important. So, again, the sort of environmental determinist argument doesn't quite work when you start looking at the details. What about cultural Darwinism? Might this be seen as a way of naturalizing the domination of Europeans over non-European peoples? Right? And by that I mean providing an explanation which makes it look like it's simply a fact of nature, that somehow Europeans, it's not because they had this creepy dominating impulse that you can't sort of blame them. It's just that they had all these germs. They couldn't help that. They showed up and all these other people died. Well, it's just nature. Right? Is this that kind of argument? And this is where, I don't know if we're going to get through all of these, we have to start thinking about what it would mean to make a cultural Darwinist argument. Here, we're going to run through a variety of ways of what evolution is, how evolution happens, and ask ourselves whether it's even relevant to try to apply it to culture. So before we can apply it to culture, we have to have some idea what we're actually applying. Here's a nice depiction, or a simple sort of conceptual diagram depicting evolution by natural selection. And what we're imagining here, starting in the upper left, is that there's some organism. It can be a plant, it can be an animal, it can be a germ, and it's in some environment, and they are interacting with each other. Over time, this is the arrow going to the right, organisms mutate. Right? Everyone knows what that means? Right? Right? Okay. As long as everyone's comfortable with that term. What that means is that over time we're going to have multiple organisms, or rather a variety of organisms, a variety of mutations at least, of that organism. Right? There are a variety of possibilities that will arise simply by the nature of genetics. Over time, these mutations are going to come into some kind of competition with each other. And that competition is going to be mediated precisely by that relationship with the environment, right? It's not that these organisms fight it out in hand-to-hand combat with each other. It's that they're each trying to reproduce in their environment. The environment is also not static, right? The environment can change as well. And it's a question of which mutations find greater success in reproducing themselves within that dynamic environment over time. And so the result, according to sort of standard Darwinian theory, eventually you end up with a new organism interacting with an environment which, and this goes on over vast stretches of time, and produces the diversity of life that we know. Now, this links back to that idea of divergent evolution in mammals and so forth. It applies to plants, it applies to germs, so on and so forth. Now, contrast that, try to make that work with cultures instead of organisms. Right? To make a cultural Darwinist argument, you would have to basically postulate that there is a culture living in an interaction with its environment, and that it somehow mutates over time. Then there is competition among different cultures, and then as a result of that competition and those mutations, and remember, it's kind of interesting to wonder what it would mean, is mutation really a concept that applies to a culture? I mean, sure, cultures change, but do they change in the same way via genetic mutation, for example? I mean, how analogous is that? But it results in some kind of new culture interacting with its environment. That would be the basic bones of a cultural Darwinist argument. Now I want to contrast this, I'll come back to whether that makes any sense in a moment, to evolution by artificial selection. And the reason this matters is that this is actually a key part of the Neolithic Revolution. It's the shift from evolution by natural selection to evolution by artificial selection that essentially differentiates domesticated agriculture, plants and animals, from non-domesticated wild plants and animals, right? So here we have the same basic pieces except one difference. The environment is modified by humans, consciously or unconsciously, but we're specifically interested, how conscious it was at different points in time is open to speculation, but for now let's just say the environment is modified by humans. And an example of this, a key example of this, is controlled breeding. Now, what does that actually entail? Anybody know? With plants, for example, what does that entail? How do we control the breeding of plants? Well, okay, maybe it's easier to start with animals. How do we control the breeding of animals? None of you have ever done this? Yeah. Bingo! Okay, you only put the ones you want to mate together and let them mate. It's not that complicated. So you choose, you pick, you decide, I like this one and I like that one, and we're going to mate them because we like them more than we like the others. And we want the next generation of horses, cows, cats, dogs, you name it, to be like these rather than these others. How about with plants? Yeah. Okay, you only pollinate the ones you want to pollinate, or more generally, yeah, you can separate them. You only replant the ones that did well in the preceding generation, right? So you grow a field of corn. You don't eat all of the corn, do you? No, you save some of that corn to provide seed for next year when you are going to plant corn again. And which seed do you save? You save the seed from the plants that did the best. Now, what best means is obviously open to a lot of debate, right? Best can mean the nicest color, the biggest stalks, whatever, or it can mean it did really well even though it didn't get very much rain. But it's a question of the human stepping in and saying, we're going to replant these fruits, these seeds, from this particular plant, and we're not going to replant these others. We're going to eat those, or we're simply going to throw them away, but we're not going to replant them. And over time, what that means is that this interaction, we are essentially capturing the mutations that we prefer and propagating them to the, preferentially, and therefore to the detriment of the other mutations. This is what artificial selection is. And over time, that means we not only get new organisms, which we would get by natural selection anyway, we get very different new organisms that have been selected over time to fulfill the needs, desires, expectations, whatever criteria of human preference. This is how we got things like wheat, corn, cows, horses, that kind of thing. So if we think of cultural evolution as not a matter of natural selection, but of artificial selection, this would seem to make more sense. In other words, the cultures and their mutations are not interacting with a randomly changing wild environment, but in fact with a humanly modified and in some ways humanly created, produced environment. These cultures are not only competing, but in many ways cooperating with each other. And over time we get a new culture not by natural selection, but by artificial selection. This looks a whole lot more well-suited to Crosby's argument. If we want to try to call him a cultural Darwinist, if we want to sort of go down that path and ask ourselves, is this cultural Darwinism? It's much more likely that this is what he's talking about, given the nature of his argument and given the ways in which humans interact with organisms. It's much more likely that this is about artificial selection, or it's a better analogy than natural selection, which actually takes the wind out of the sails in a lot of ways of cultural Darwinism, or at least it doesn't naturalize it in the same way. It doesn't say, oh, this is just the result of nature. So some questions. First, we need to ask, are cultures analogous to organisms at all? What would it mean? What does it mean to say that a culture mutates, for example? Like this is an analogy or a metaphor, but is it a coherent one? In many ways, I would suggest it's not. Is cultural evolution natural, artificial, both, or neither? This distinction between natural and artificial selection is critical for understanding the domestication of plants and animals and the evolution of domesticated plants and animals, but it's not clear whether or how it applies to cultures. Are all human modifications of the environment the same or not? I mean, to say that cultures somehow result from artificial selection then leads to questions about, okay, what does it mean for humans to modify the environment? Is it the same thing to pick and choose which corn to replant as it is to, sail across the ocean and infect another people with a disease that they are not resistant to? Are all environmental determinations of humans the same or not? Are there any questions? There's also the problem of tautology, and I think I'd probably better just pick that one up next time. So we will see you on Thursday. Thank you.